Well, it's a great pleasure and honour to have a chance to talk to Adrian Dixon. Adrian, I always ask first, when and where were you born?
I was born in Cambridge, as it so happens, because Dad had returned from the war and was by now back as a Fellow of Kings.
And when?
The 5th of February 1948.
Right. So I'd like to hear something about the ancestry. Many people go back to their grandparents who they knew a little bit, or sometimes even further back. Can you tell me something about the branches of your family down to yourself?
Yes, well, the best known branch, of course, was my father's father, Professor Henry Horatio Dixon, who was also the father of Hal, my uncle. And he was a professor of botany in Dublin and discovered how sap went to the top of trees was his sort of claim to fame. But he was very, very well educated. He did a lot of work with another eminent professor in Dublin, Professor John Joly, a geologist, and the two of them published a lot together. So there was science going through the family, and in fact my gran on that side, Dorothea Mary Franks, who became Dorothea Mary Dixon, was a very, very clever lady. She got into Trinity Dublin to do medicine, but you couldn't really do medicine in those days as a female. So she got married and became a very accomplished painter and was, I think, probably just as equally clever as my grandfather. On the mother's side, it was a lawyer in Dublin and Henry Darley, Beatrice Darley, and they were solid citizens of Dublin, and the gran was a very famous tennis player, and hence my mother became a very good sportswoman too. Quite how my mother, keen sportsman, golfer, tennis player, captain of Irish lacrosse, got hitched to an out-and-out academic like my father is not known to me, but they got married in 1938, just before the war. And of course that was absolutely formative to my background because my father had just been qualified as a doctor at Bart's Hospital while he was here as a junior fellow and became a full fellow before the war. And then, of course, like many Irish citizens, they joined up in the Allied forces, frowned upon by some people in Southern Ireland, of course, but 30 to 50,000 people did join up, and they have now been acknowledged rather belatedly. My mother joined up with the women's ATS and became involved in transport in Northern Ireland, so she was based in Belfast during the war, whereas my father went from pillar to post, particularly around Cyprus, Sinai, Palestine, and then North Africa, looking after troops. And one of the formative things was that one of the jobs that Dad wanted was in Dublin and came up during those 6 years, and out of sight, out of mind, didn't know about it. So he came back to Cambridge for his career with a slight chip on his shoulder, working at this second-rate university called Cambridge.
Tell me something about the character of these people. Did you know your grandparents at all?
I did know my grandparents. I died when my grandfather was 4, but I couldn't have vivid memories of him, particularly in Dublin, rather than in Kerry, where they retired to. And he was by then fairly senior and took an interest in walking around the garden. I can remember that because he was always interested in plants. My gran went on much longer and I knew her very well. Of course, she had the family deafness, which Dad inherited, my sister inherited, and I inherited. But she grew up, she was there in the hearing aid, not before hearing aids, so she had an ear trumpet, which she used with great aplomb. My father, as you may remember, had 2 hearing aids with trailing flexors down to big things, which were, and he used to get his jackets made with 2 top pockets. And everybody said he was very friendly. Well, he was very friendly, but one of the reasons he was friendly, he used to, incorrect nowadays, put his arm around people in order to get the voice close to the hearing aid. I never quite knew which it was. But no, I didn't know my mother's father, but my mother's mother I knew very well.
moving on to your parents, tell me something about their character and what they did.
Well, Dad was a boffiny scientist working in the Department of Pathology in Tennis Court Road. His area of interest was the death of a cell and the death of liver cells, death of brain cells, and one of his areas, which you probably know about, was he was interested in what was the moment of death, because at that stage transplantation was customary. Was it legal to take? Anyway, he was involved in that area, and he was a very upright man. He went to church, was involved in chapel quite a lot, and was, I think, a very, very loved tutor for advanced students here. He looked after the students here, and probably, rather like my Uncle Hal, spent a bit more time in college than he should have pursuing academic work, and possibly that, I mean, Dad was made Fellow of the Royal College of Pathologists and a professorial fellow. Hal was grossly overlooked because he discovered how, as you know, Wilson's disease was cured, and he should have been given a lot more. But I think being a vice provost, being a fellow, being a tutor was considered a bit that you're not absolutely fully involved with science, whereas both of them did very, very good science. But Dad was a lovely man, but he was absolutely crippled with deafness. The hearing aids were nowhere near what they were in my day. And of course, in my day, my sister, sadly predeceased, her husband, another Kingsman, Peter Greenhouse, was greatly benefited with cochlear implants. But I couldn't have cochlear implants because magnetic resonance imaging and cochlear implants don't go hand in glove. But anyway, so Dad was great fun. Mum was very much more pragmatic and organised the house, organised everything. And Dad was not mollycoddled, but well looked after by Mum, put it that way, and she ran everything really.
So you mentioned a memory at about the age of 4 walking around the garden with your grandfather. Is that your first memory, or are there other earlier memories?
No, I don't think I have many memories more than before 4. I can remember my 4th Christmas because Dad came back with a Trix twin electric railway, which just went round and round the Christmas tree. I don't think it did anything more than that, but I think he was more interested than I was at that stage.
Moving on a little bit to the age of sort of 6, 7, 8, were you particularly interested in any hobby or at that age?
Well, I was very keen on sport. My mum was seriously good tennis player, and I was involved with that. Dad was fairly hopeless at tennis and not great at golf, but golf comes later. But Mum would have, I mean, she was an young international in tennis, and I think you may have heard the story that when they came to Cambridge, you know, when new people come to Cambridge, oh, what's your subject? What's your subject? And it was rather assumed that the wife would also have a subject. And so, what's your subject? No, I play games. And that sort of caused a little bit of, yes. But she taught games, and then unfortunately she had a back injury, and that put a cut to that. But so I was much more interested in sport than I was in other things at that age, a youngster.
Okay, good. So, and your first school?
I was lucky that I went just down the road to King's Choir School, as it was called then, and now I think it's just King's School. But it was a fantastic education, and in fact, if I'm allowed to give mentors my plug, one of them was a Kingsman called Michael Keel, who you may know of, and he ended up being headmaster of Westminster Abbey Boys' School, and he looked after me in the first year that I went at the age of 7, and there were a lot of Don's children in that form, and many of them are household names. Mark Hill, Mark Griffith, Poston, Basil Poston, Philip Goodison, Graham Rooke. I mean, these were all household Cambridge names. Adrian Keynes, you name it. So we all, Richard Boyd, we all lived very close to the school. But Michael Keel absolutely gave us such an uplift. And I was 7, the other boys in the class were 9. I was 2 years ahead of my thing. And I always remember Michael Keel. Adrian hasn't done quite as well as we'd hoped this year, but I suppose Molière, Shakespeare and Goldsmith at the age of 7 are a bit much. But he really did give us a weekly quiz, which involved with how would you get from Aberystwyth to Cambridge on a Sunday. And this got all the Don parents coming into the college to look up Bradshaw's to work it out for us. No, he was a remarkable, but it was a very good school.
He was a teacher? Or
teacher, he was a teacher.
In what?
At King's, yes. The school itself was going through a curious phase with headmasters changing, which I won't go into, but
what did he teach, English? Or?
He taught English and history as far as I remember.
Yeah, okay.
Because I remember being given an essay, what would you win if you won the football pools? And I think my answer was I would go to the pub every day and come home fully drunk, which got my father into a bit of trouble.
So you played a lot of games there too?
Yes. I was a bit of a sickly child, I have to say. I probably had an episode of TB at the time. Many of us did. I had a little Gone Focus up there. And I was a bit sickly with a lot. So I wasn't as good at games there as I should have been. Cricket I played. But I played soccer, and in those days there was a fabulous match of fellows, you wouldn't be allowed nowadays, fellows versus the school. And Noel Allen was centre forward for the fellowship and headed a ball, and I was goalkeeper, and we just, happily I saved the goal, but we had a bit of a collision.
Was he provost then?
I can't quite remember whether he was or not. This would have been just before I went to the next school, let's say 1959, 60. No, I think
he was, I think.
It
was. So at that school, did you have any other particular interest? Did you sing or did you?
No, I didn't sing. Everybody hoped I would sing because I had blue eyes and fair hair, but Boris Ord was quite adamant that I couldn't sing, so that was great. In fact, I had difficulty when I miraculously got a scholarship to go to Uppingham, and they were sure that I ought to sing in the choir, and I was pretty certain that I wouldn't sing in the choir because I wanted to do more sport. So it was quite a tricky one to go to the audition and sing just badly enough.
Yeah.
Anyway, no, King's was a very, very good school, and I was taught well. The headmaster towards the end of my time was John Briggs, David Briggs, and his wife Mary was a wonderful maths teacher, and she was very, very influential in getting me up to maths scholarship standard anyway.
You were a day boy, presumably?
I was, indeed, yeah.
So you didn't suffer any kind of trauma of going off to school or anything like that?
No. Absolutely unaware of any of the things that were going on, meaning that the Briggs took over, yeah.
Yeah. So at the end of that, you went on to Uppingham. What was that like?
Well, again, it did me very well, let me say that. And I was given a scholarship because I don't think Dad would have been able to do it without that. So I'm very eternally grateful to Uppingham, and they did a lot. But I think, again, I was put in with boys 2 years older than me. And I did my O-levels, some of them in my first year on arrival at 13, 14, and I did all my A-levels at 16, which was curious because it meant you marked time at the end, like I did at the choir school, that I sort of stayed in the top form for 3 years and all my friends had gone. Likewise in Uppingham at a big public school, by going into the O-level class on year 1 got you out of fagging. Well, you can imagine that made you very, very popular with your peer group of cohort. And I think I was very lucky that I did have sport, because I could get onto the cricket team, Colts, in my first or second year, and because I could play hockey at that level to get onto that. And then I sort of was able to sort of justify being a SWAT was not going to get you any brownie points whatsoever.
Did you? I went to Sedbergh. We used to play Uppingham at Rugger, I think.
Yes, I wasn't a rugby player.
No. So we didn't meet on the rugby field.
No.
Although
I got out of rugby by playing hockey quite strenuously.
One thing that happens around the age of 15 in many English families is that the children are brought up as Anglicans and they are confirmed into the Church of England. And between that age, 15 to sort of 18, 19, is often the most religious phase in their life. I wondered what your experience was.
Well, as I said, Dad went to chapel and went to St. Edward's Holy Trinity, and so I was baptized in King's Chapel.
Really?
Not happened to everybody. And then I was confirmed when I was in Uppingham. And I was an itinerant attender in chapel when I was a student here. Alec Vidler and then Till were the deans of my times at the school, and I read the lesson. I said I wasn't amusing, but I read the lesson, and fairly some Easter broadcast services and things like that. So I did go to chapel.
You've got a good voice.
I could speak just about, read, but I couldn't sing. But I didn't attend church as much as I should when I didn't have time when I was a junior doctor. You were just rushed off your feet. But I did later, when I got to London and Bart's Hospital, go to church from time to time there. And both Bart's the Less and Bart's the Great were terrific. And we actually, because I lived there, I got married in church, Bart's the Great, which was a great, before it was fashionable with 4 weddings and a funeral, I'll point out.
But you don't say what religion means to you.
I'm sorry?
What does religion mean to you? In other words, are you middle of the road? Do you question
I would say
it?
middle of the road. I did go to chapel every Sunday when I was Master of Peterhouse, and I still go. I've been there every Sunday this term, I think, one. And during the vacations, I sometimes go to St. Botolph's, but I'm not an absolutely card-carrying communicant, I'm afraid. But having seen medicine, it's a tricky one, and where you are in that, I'm going to leave that area if I may. But
well, there's quite a lot of the scientists I interviewed, like John Polkinghorne and others.
yes,
we discuss the relations between science and religion. Some of them see them as opposed, some of them see them as dealing with different things. And I interviewed the ex-Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, and talked to him about it. So do you see science and religion as compatible, or what?
I think just about. John Murray Thomas was another person who thought they were compatible, and I'll go along with that, but I'm not going to spread further. One of my former radiology colleagues has taken that even further. Ken Miles, Professor of Radiology in Sussex, with a publication we may have read called From Atoms to Billiard Balls or something, to, anyway, but quite a good exposition of how it could all work.
I interviewed John Thomas, Murray Thomas,
Yeah.
among others. So in Uppingham, were there inspirational teachers like there were at
Yes,
King's?
I was lucky again. It was a very, very interesting form I was in. with varied superstars. Piers Goff, architect, for example. Rick Stein was not quite so, but it was very, very good teaching, particularly chemistry, Curry Cavill, maths, Sam Kendall, and physics, Garth Wheatley. They were all excellent, and I have to say the hitch was that I was almost forced to do maths, physics and chemistry, which I did. And I only thought I wanted to do medicine rather late in life, so in my repeat year, so to speak, I did biology A-level, and the thing that I couldn't do English. I was very bad at English in those days. Curious for a subsequent editor in my latter life, the use of English was a major hurdle for me.
Interesting. Did you take part in any other, apart from sports? Were you an actor? Did you do...
No, I didn't do any really well. I acted in a few...
Or politics? Or...
No, not really. Sport and work was about it.
And what about authority? I mean, you weren't a fag, but were you a prefect? Or?
I did eventually become a house prefect, school prefect, and captain of house. Yes, I did. Again, rather embarrassingly at the age of 16, because I left school quite young, and I had... Because in those days you took Cambridge entrance at Christmas time, and then you had a period off, and that was a very formative time, actually, my year off between. Thanks to my father, I managed to get a job in the experimental medicine department in Trinity College Dublin at St Luke's Hospital in Rathgar, and that opened my eyes to research quite a lot. And apart from being away from my home environment and having to stand on my own 2 feet, I learned some pretty useful things. I learned how to drink a pint of Guinness properly, which is quite good. I played a lot of tennis, and I played in the Leinster League, which we happened to win. And I grew up enormously in that. So I was a little bit more adult than I might have been when I came up because of that.
Interesting. So Ireland seems to feature quite a lot in your background.
Hugely, because the summer holidays every year involved the family setting off by car to Dublin via Liverpool, which was quite a trek in those days, and the car had to be lifted on by the roll-on, roll-offs. And my father would supervise the car. We would wander around, my sister and I would wander around Liverpool a bit, and then we'd go across, and then we would get to Dublin. We'd have breakfast with the maternal relatives, and then we'd head on down to County Kerry, where my grandfather on the Dixon side and my grandmother retired to down in County Kerry. So every summer was 2 weeks in Kerry, 1 week with the maternal side before the return journey. So every year, I think I've been to Ireland every year of my life, so yes, spot on that one.
My great passion as a boy was fishing, trout fishing.
Yes, I know, very good rivers round us in Kerry, but totally boring to a sportsman, sorry. No moving ball, no nothing. But no, it's a fact, it's fascinating, and many of my good friends are fishermen, but I didn't get bugged, didn't get caught.
You mentioned that the sciences were pushing you in one direction, but you were interested in medicine. How early were you interested in medicine, and why?
I suppose my father was very formative in the decision to go into medicine, but I honestly can't quite remember. I didn't think I was ever going to be a good enough scientist and to hack being an out-and-out scientist in the real sciences. I shouldn't say that, my medical colleagues would be horrified, but you know what I mean.
Pure sciences, yes. Okay, so after that formative year, was it obvious that you would choose to come to Cambridge, or did you look at other places?
It was a totally different world in those days, and people now say, why on earth did you go to Cambridge? My daughter went to Oxford, for example. Why did you go to King's? Well, King's was very much part of my blood, you know, that I'd been there, I knew it. And I don't know, I mean, people may say that I only got into King's my father was here. You could say the other way around, that I had to be better than that. And the interview, well, to put it bluntly, of course, in those days you had to take something called the scholarship exam. And you had to sit a fairly severe test, which was ahead of A-levels. I didn't get a scholarship, but I did well enough to satisfy. The most difficult thing was my interview with John Broadbent, who was
senior tutor.
Senior tutor. Whether he was senior tutor that year, he must have been. But anyway, his subject was, and what do you do other than sport and science? And I said, well, I read the odd novel, which was fatal error, but I do remember discussing somebody called John Wayne or Hurry On Down or something like that. But it was quite clear I was on weak ice.
So you just came in as an ordinary person, and to read
natural sciences.
Right.
I thought I was going to do maths, but I knew that was no good. And at that stage, and probably if that decision had been earlier, I would have gone to another college, because ending up being taught by your father and your uncle was possibly not ideal, but I couldn't fault either of them. They showed me no favoritism and no quarter.
Right. So what year did you come up?
66.
66, right. And did it feel very different coming back as an undergraduate to what you...
Oh, hugely different. And it was totally different from anything I'd experienced. And I had the most remarkable time. I would like to say that I worked like a beaver and got first throughout, which I didn't. I ended up with a 2-1, but that was good for me, actually. Lucky, I think. But I did a lot of extracurricular activities, shall I say, as you probably know a little bit about.
No? Tell me.
Well, I played sports. So I was captain, tennis captain, table tennis. I played hockey. We got to hockey finals. I was marking Schwelik, the English right back. I was left wing. I was suitably exposed. I organised the college rag, university rag, and that involved getting college council permission to cycle round and round front court for 6 hours, and how many. There was no such thing as sponsorship. You had to guess how many laps. It was quite mad. Nice conversation with Saltmarsh, who I knew very well because he'd been vice provost at organised children's parties.
Yes.
He didn't quite understand what somebody was doing cycling around front court, but this was all to raise money. We raised a lot of money for the rag, and it was my job. It was, if you can imagine those 60s, that was sort of late flower power. The college committee decided, in their infinite wisdom, of which I was the chair, that we would not send the King's money to the Earl Haig Fund, because in the past, all the monies went to the Earl Haig Fund. But King said, no, we will send 1/3 to the Earl Haig Fund, 1/3 to Oxfam, and 1/3 to Viet Cong refugees, and this, that, and the other, which prompted huge controversy. And so much so that the Daily Telegraph wrote a little article saying, it is students like Adrian, Dixon and Tariq Ali who do not deserve governmental support. There you go. I was a bit of a marked man going through customs, I think, thereafter. But so there was that. The other thing that happened in that stage is that I can't quite remember how we got the money, but there was money to convert some of the redundant wine cellars into the King's College discotheque in the basement. And I was one of the first resident disc jockeys and was involved with signing people to play, and anyway, flower power.
Was all this radical activity helped by the fact that you now had Provost Leach, I imagine?
I don't think that entered into it, though the college was moving to the left at that stage, no doubt about that. And I knew, curiously, I knew a lot of fellows not because of my paternal links, but because of my sport. Because in those days, a lot of King's Fellows played tennis at a very high level.
Yeah.
So John Goldthorpe was probably the best of the group. Ken Moody might take exception to that, but he was effectively a squash player on a tennis court. I think he'll accept that. But those two were very strong. There was a very eminent historian, now sadly dead, Geary, who became Professor of History in Nottingham. He was very good. David Tuckett and Charlie Loke played. So there was quite a lot of intermingling of fellows and students. And I think that was something that was, and may still be, exceptional in King's, but the mingling of students and fellows was much greater than in other colleges at that time. So we all knew quite a lot of fellows. I shared rooms in the gatehouse, as you may know, the left, just get my bearings, the north side of the gatehouse used to be 2 students' rooms, and I shared that with Merlin Waterson, who was a History of Art regional director of the National Trust, EB, and all that. I was best man at his wedding. And that was a very, very happy half of the gatehouse, and we entertained all sorts of people, including fellows, in those lovely rooms looking out across the chapel and down across to Gibbs. He was a student of Michael Jaffe, who lived right up there at that time.
So you're mentioning so many wonderful names, and I knew when I first came in 1971. Let's take one or two. Michael Jaffe.
Yes.
A rather bizarre character, as I remember him.
Yes, flamboyant, I think is the word. But he was a very good director of the Fitzwilliam Museum, and my colleague Merlin Waterson was hugely helped by him as a mentor. But he was controversial. Changing the hall round so that the dons or fellows didn't have to walk. When I was a student in '66, there was a huge wait while we were all waiting for the grace, while Provost Shepherd, if he was senior fellow, tottered in from one end to the other, and we all wait. So changing hall round, painting it yellowish at that time, with rather bizarre lighting as it was then, was controversial. So too the ripping out of the Victorian, Victorian panelling in the chapel to make the place lower for the Adoration of the Magi. So pretty controversial. And my father, and he obviously got on quite well, but I know they teased, because my father was chairman of the wine committee. And Michael was only interested in champagne, only interested in vintage champagne, which Dad thought was a complete rip-off. And Dad, because he returned, I may have told you the story before, because he returned to Cambridge after the war, and King's was quite wealthy at that stage, I don't quite know what, he was able to buy quite a lot of really good 1947, 48, 49 Premier Crus and laid them down, which I think some may still be being sold. I may be wrong on that. But Dad, on a wicked moment, used to sometimes say, Adrian, you know that everybody says that Keynes and Kahn and Caldor, Beryl was a very good bursar, have made a lot of money for the college. I'm not sure that I haven't made as much, if not more, buying and selling wine. Anyway, with a twinkle in his eye, as he used to. But no, going back to Jaffe, he was an interesting and colourful character, and but he did like his vintage champagne.
Another person who, who hadn't mentioned him yet, but I knew quite well towards the end, was Peter Avery.
Oh yes, who lived at the far end of Gibbs. He again was an interesting chap. I had quite a few friends who read Oriental Studies in various guises, and again, very good mentor, very good advice. There was a wonderful student a year ahead of me called Peter Caroche. I don't know whether that name means anything to you, because he did Part 2 Oriental Studies, and he was always Peter Avery's. He was A, very good at Oriental Studies, and B, a very good croquet player. I think he may have been world champion croquet or something. But anyway, going back to his Oriental studies, he was on his part 2, he was going for a particular Persian study. And I think you had to do a dissertation, and the problem was finding somebody to examine the dissertation. And Peter, I think, wrote down to, it would have been SOAS at that stage, but it was, became SOAS, saying, is there anybody you can think who can examine? Well, I think somebody in Cambridge called Caroche who could help. Anyway, that may be apocryphal, but it was in that area. No, Peter Avery was good fun. I mean, again, controversial character for a variety of reasons, which I won't go into, but again, I'm not allowed medically to say towards the end of his life, but a life of heavy living eventually took its toll.
Yes. Well, I interviewed him as well. Coming back to John Saltmarsh.
Yes.
They all seem larger than life, these people. I knew him a bit towards the end.
He was larger than life and terrific with his bushy sideburns and whiskers. And sandals with no socks
and
in all walks of life. I was taken up to the roof of King's by him because he was a great expert on the chapel. I also, winters were very different in those days. The river used to freeze and the fens used to freeze over, and he, in all his attributes, was one of the most brilliant skaters you could ever imagine. And he would skate along the cam with his hands behind the back, just going like that, where all of us were falling over, and he sailed through. It was a very moving case. But going back to my earliest memories of John Saltmarsh, he ran fantastic children's parties, which I did in Peterhouse in later years, for the children of fellows and staff I did, and smaller college. But the hall was converted, the tables and the benches were made into a huge 3-dimensional maze, and if you were an athletic 7 or 9-year-old, you could get up to the top of that. Health and safety, see children landing on their skull on the stone stairs. It was a very happy day though, and Stephen Glanville was provost, and he gave a 5-shilling book token to every child of every fellow. I remember that. I still have a couple of books with his handwriting in them.
Well, when you mentioned skating along with his arms behind his back, the person who always used to walk around King's with that was Philip Radcliffe.
Yes.
Did you know?
I knew Philip Radcliffe quite well, not because I'm interested in music, but his rooms were on D staircase, which is where Dad's rooms were, so I often bumped into him. And I think that's now the Saltmarsh suite,
yes,
where Philip did. And I loved in chapel hearing Philip Radcliffe's responses, and I had them done in Peterhouse quite frequently, because I said, who are you going to have? Let's not have Stanford in C every time. Let's have some Radcliffe from time to time.
I mentioned Edmund Leach. Did you know Edmund at all?
I did, because I was at school with his son Alexander, who was a couple of years younger than me in King's. And also because he lived on Storey's Way, which is where my parents lived. So he was 10 up, shall I say. So I knew the Leach family a little. I used to go around and muck around with Alex on the vacation, but didn't know him, and I honestly didn't know what he was particularly expert for.
Moving to your contemporaries, I'm not sure they were contemporaries, but there was several experts on China. Mark Elvin, he may be a little older than you.
Doesn't ring bells, that one.
And Bernal, you know Bernal's, J.D. Bernal.
Yes, I remember him, but...
his son Martin was a specialist then on China.
Yes, and I think he was a tutor.
Yeah.
I do remember him. I can't quite remember how I came into contact with him, but there were a lot of interesting people in my year in Cambridge. In King's, wouldn't have predicted that Mervyn King was going to become governor of the Bank of England. We wouldn't have predicted that Oliver Hart was going to get the Economics Nobel Award. But they were both very bright and doing well. But it was a fabulous year, and we were right at the top of the exam results in the league and everything. There was a lot of very brilliant people in college at that time. There was always celebration by the tutors that not me, but we collectively had done okay.
What about, you mentioned games and rags and things like this. What about affairs of the heart?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch.
Affairs of the heart.
Affairs of the heart. Oh yes, I had a few affairs of the heart here and there. Yeah, there were. It was quite interesting insofar that I was in Cambridge and I had some friends who were known to me from Cambridge days, tennis partners and things like that. And then there were undergraduates, not so many in those days, of course. But and you couldn't exactly be a disc jockey. And I used to make my own clothes in sort of power colours. And had an old sewing machine, used to run up a frock coat in bizarre colours. But no, it was all good fun and a lot of socialising. Yes, too much probably. I would have done better in the exams if I hadn't done so much of that.
So you got a 2-1, and then what did you decide to do?
Well, it was fairly obvious then that you were going to a London medical school because you couldn't stay in Cambridge to do your medicine in those days. And in fact, I'd already got an offer from Barts to do medicine back in 1966. So I had to go then as a Cambridge final year student for an interview at Barts. And it wasn't quite the apocryphal interview that if you could hold the rugby ball you were in, but it was, I think the Dean, anonymous, looked over his glasses and he said, "Oh, hello Dixon, your father was here. I see you play sport. What would you beat me by at tennis?" Which is quite a difficult answer to suddenly give because he was pretty well in an armchair by that stage. And I said, "I don't know, sir, I've never seen you play." But that was good enough, and I got in as a place at Barts, which was great. And I became very, very keen on Barts. And if we get time, I will say what Barts did for me, because I've been giving back to Barts. I've been on the Barts charity, raising money for their various things.
Well, we have the time. Tell us.
Okay, well, Barts, I was a moderately idle medical student at Barts, but I did a few things. I was playing golf fairly seriously for university, and tennis. We won the London League. I played a fantastic match. I was a less good partner, but my partner was Nick Perry, who was top star at that stage, against St Mary's in the final, and JPR Williams, if you didn't know, as well as being a rugby international, also was Junior Wimbledon finalist, and that was quite a big match, and we managed to win that and win the cup, the league and the knockout and everything. So tennis and golf and working hard. I mean, I didn't have any trouble with the exams, but I wasn't pushing it out at that stage. And Barts then, fabulous buildings like this, Gibbs Building as well. And I did my first house job there, which was in surgery. And a very good man called Manning was one of my mentors. And he said, "Adrian, you really need to go to a different place for your medicine. Why don't you look at Nottingham and Southampton universities, which are new medical schools, which had academic departments, but had not got their own students through, so there's a chance for an outsider." So I go down to Southampton at his advice, rather conceitedly, for the professorial medical unit's house job. And I met Professor Wright. And I'll never forget, the first question he asked was, if you are my houseman, what research project would you like to do? To which I said, gosh, I thought I might be a bit busy looking after patients. And from that moment on, it was quite clear the interview was going hopelessly the wrong way. So the next day, I go up to Nottingham and I meet two of my long-term heroes, but particularly Professor Mitchell, Professor Langman, who interviewed me, and Professor Hampton, I think, was also there. And they said the same thing, blow me down. And I had a millisecond to invent a research project. Or I stuck to my guns and said, they said, oh, thank God, we thought you were a smart aleck from Cambridge. You wouldn't want to do any real work. And that was the ethos of Nottingham. I got the job, and Mitchell was one of the two people who really drove me and made me interested in academic work. And doing his house job and then his SHO was really the turning point of me for medicine. And I just want to get that on record, because Nottingham, really busy, fantastically busy, huge social deprivation in those days. You either worked in the mines, players smoked like a literally factory, boots and Raleigh, you know, the slums in the meadows in Nottingham were fairly run down, no outside loos, etc., etc., etc. And you saw medicine in the raw, and that made me relatively useful. Sleeves rolled up, I got my membership quite quickly, which was one of the stepping stones that you needed to do. And then, what did I specialise in? Now, I could have gone into psychiatry, and I might have been very good as a deaf psychiatrist, but radiology was A, evolving at that stage, and B, something that you could do if you were deaf. So that was, and also I realised at Nottingham that the person that had the maximal fun was the senior house officer, because you took the patient in off the ambulance and you worked out, and you more or less had to have everything delivered and done and dusted by the time you presented it to your boss, who was, consultants were much more consultants in those days, that they were relying on their junior staff much more. And I'm not sure we'll get a chance, but that is a great change in medical training, which I think is a great pity, that you are allowed to cut your teeth at a much more junior stage, and your boss was there to back you up. And certainly when I was a consultant, I tried to allow the juniors to do things. I'd be just around the corner, I could step in at a moment on an interventional procedure, but to let them get on with things. But anyway, I've digressed. But Nottingham was a huge stimulation. And then, having decided to do radiology, against Professor Mitchell's desire, because he wanted to keep me, because he and I were very, very bosom buddies at that stage, I got the job to train in Barts as a radiologist, which was the next great break for me. Just to finish the Mitchell story, he was passionately interested in the aorta. And when CT came out, and I'll do a bit about that, I could see the aorta, and I could see the aorta, and I could measure the dimensions of the aorta and how much calcium there was in it, which was for the first time. And because of that, I did a paper with him, which showed, intriguingly, that men put calcium down in their aorta much ahead of women. And then the menopause comes, and calcium is then leaching out of the bones and into the aorta. And we published this together, and he very generously said, I was against you going into radiology, but you were right and I was wrong, which I thought was a generous thing for him to say 10 years on. Anyway, Bart's training in radiology. Lots of fabulous radiologists, but Ian Kelsey-Fry, who became Dean of the Medical School, was the person that whipped me into shape. And I did a standard training and did okay, got the exams all fairly quickly. And then came the absolute thing that elevated me, which was that Ian Kelsey-Fry used Bart's charity money to buy one of, stroke the first CT scanner to go into a big hospital anywhere in England. One of the first in Europe. And by absolute break of luck, I got the EMI. It was in those days ME scanning. EMI Musical Industries curiously created the first CT scanner in the world. And I was the EMI research fellow. And I was given this unknown piece of kit to play with. That's not true. We were hard at it. But Ian Kelsey-Fry was so instrumental, and he, curiously, back in the 60s, science in medicine was in clinical medicine was pretty weak. And he latched on to the growing popularity of the randomized clinical trial of, i.e. pushing half the patients to one thing and half the patients the other and seeing which does better. I mean, it seems obvious, but that was relatively novel at that time. And he got me interested, and one of our first studies was patients who might or might not have had an abdominal mass. Is it better to go for CT or other tests? And it transpired you got the diagnosis quicker, cheaper, and less invasively going with CT. And that was really the mission of my career, was proving that CT and MR were effective for the patient and the referring clinician. Because, and finally, does it lead to a better diagnosis? What's much more difficult is proving that then has an impact on life, because it's fine and dandy and a lot happens. We won't get back into theology, but a lot of people expect medicine to cure everything, but we are all on a downward slope, actually. But anyway, but to be the first person investigating this, and hence I wrote a textbook, which was a handbook of CT. Sorry?
The first in the world, or the first in
First in the country to have in a major NHS hospital.
Going on in America, presumably, as well.
No, because it was an English invention. EMI scanners, I mean, it really was an English invention. Hence, Hounsfield got the Nobel Prize. We hadn't got the money to have so many machines, but this was one of the first. So it was cutting edge. We didn't know what we were looking at. We had to work it all out, and hence one of my textbooks was getting a body from the anatomy department and going through it slice by slice to marrow. And again, one of the things that I'm vaguely proud of was showing that the male and the female of the species have different distribution of abdominal fat, that men are apples and women are pears on the whole, with subcutaneous fat around the hips, and chaps put the fat on here and all that. So it was quite interesting stuff. I couldn't believe those results of the women and the male. And I went to Roy Kahn. I said, Roy, am I absolutely mad? But do men have a lot more fat in the tummy than the woman? Oh yes, he said, absolutely. If I'm offered the cholecystectomy, gallbladder operation between a man and a woman, I'll always take the woman. Once you've got through all the subcutaneous blubber, there's none left in the tummy. There's nothing there. So what I had spent a year or two trying to work out, he knew just like that, just by experience, but it hadn't been reported before. So anyway, to have the opportunity to learn CT in 1978, I mean, that's the mark of how early it was, got me the job in Cambridge, and we won't gather from there, but I wanted to get the plugs of Bart's Hospital and Nottingham, the two people after King's who gave me a real leg up. And why, when Bart's, because when I gave my first lecture to the Kelvin Club in Peterhouse with Perutz, Klug, etc., sitting in the front row, I said, well, it's a particular pleasure and honour to have been elected a fellow of Peterhouse, but there can't be many fellows of Peterhouse that have come from an even older institution. So I put up a slide of Bart's the Great of 1123, which rather did that to me. But so Bart's was very good. So Bart's had its 850 50th when I was a houseman there. So when we were on the 900th anniversary, it was rather nice to be able to give back, and they said, could you help? I didn't have a leg to stand on because they gave me the CT machine all those years ago. So that, going back to centenaries, there can't be, I think the then Provost, Proctor Mike, said there were only 4 people in the congregation at the 100th Festival of Lessons and 9 Carols in 2018 who'd also been there in 1958, and I was both 58 and 2018. Ashley kindly took me in as a guest.
Very nice. Just going back to being faced with Perutz and Klug, can you tell me the story again about Aaron Klug and CT?
Yes, it's a very nice story. One of the difficulties that I had coming to Cambridge, and many radiologists up and down the country have, was trying to persuade people to put these expensive machines in because the NHS couldn't afford them. And so a lot of my work was trying to prove that they were effective. And you probably gave some money to the Addenbrooke's Hospital Cancer Scanner Appeal Fund, which raised the money for and highly successful fundraising. John Phillips, another person I should have given a plug to, and his wife Kathy, who raised the money for the CT, 500,000, a lot of money in 1979. And they raised it and were then told there's nowhere in the hospital to put it into. So there was discussion as to whether we should buy the pub on Mowbray Road and put it in there. That finally shamed them. But then they said, well, that's fine, but you've got to earn the money or find the money for the running costs for 5 years. And we will only take it on if the Department of Health say in an audit. But anyway, so raising money was one of my major missions, both for the hospital, the university department, and the college. In fact, I don't think I'd have been made master of the college if I hadn't got a good track record of fundraising. But the fundraising meant that we gave talks all over England, East Anglia, to raise money. And one of them was in a little town called Brauging, south of Royston. So I go down there to the WRVS one evening, and I say, well, it's very kind of the ladies of laughing. Braffing, young man, says the lady beside me. Braffing. So I was quite young in those days. And I gave my talk, bought a few bottles of jam, thought nothing more about it, except 16, 18 years later, I was given a call by a solicitor to say that a lady who'd been in the audience had left some money to the Addenbrooke's Hospital Scanner Appeal Fund. Very nice, I thought. Her entire estate, £750,000, which bought one entirely new CT machine, which was terrific. And because of that, because of the timing, because of my link with Siemens, who were very good to me, I was reasonably good to them. Not financially, but getting... In a radiology department, if you don't have the best kit, you don't get the best start. You can't do the best machine, you can't do the best research. So your kit is paramount. And we were given the first 4-slice CT machine that took 4 slices at a time, which was absolutely sensational. And because of that, and we got it ahead of no German hospital had it. We got it, and we got these slightly prototype machines with no bells and whistles, and it didn't have a dashboard, and it wasn't a sort of Bentley Fash or any of that jazz. And we got it at a reasonable price because we'd feedback saying the real wipers don't very well, and if I were you, I'd do something different. Anyway, because it was quite controversial to get this new machine because of the remarkable story that it had come so much from a donation, I thought, well, we need to celebrate. And I asked Aaron, who was always so charming and on a plane up there compared with most mortals, would he ever? And he came along to open. So we had the head of Siemens over, little me, and Aaron Klug in his Peterhouse tie opening the CT machine, which was good. I knew the Klug family very well because I'm allowed to talk about what their son had early cancer, which I was involved with. His wife, Lady Klug, had cancer, which I was involved with, and I think I diagnosed Aaron's appendicitis, so I kind of knew them all inside and out quite well.
The story you told me earlier, because when I interviewed him, he told me about how he had worked out how to turn a two-dimensional photograph into a three-dimensional scan, but he hadn't got the Nobel Prize for that. Can you tell me about what happened in that way?
Well, I'm not that much of a physicist to be able to explain, but he was way ahead in Fourier transformation and back projection to get these images sorted out. And he knew more about that than I did. I knew the medicine. But he wrote, there was a book I think he wrote about his South African upbringing and how he and Cormac were great friends and climbed Table Mountain together, and one of them saved each other's lives. And they were thick as thieves, and they were all on the same wavelength. And Cormac came to do his PhD here, and his thesis, which was an integral of something or others, he used a radioisotope source rather than an X-ray source, but it was the same thing, taking samples from different angles around the body. And I knew that they'd worked very closely together, but I'm ashamed to say that I couldn't tell you exactly what Aaron had done that Cormac hadn't, but there was controversy as to whether Cormac deserved it. But I think because his PhD thesis, which had hidden in the university library like many since the early 50s, had logged it quite early in relation to Aaron, I think that's probably what.
So I heard a mistaken story, which was that Aaron worked out the concepts of it and published on it, and then some American made the first CT scanner and got the Nobel Prize, but that's...
No, the first CT scanner, the Nobel Prize went to Godfrey Hounsfield. And Hounsfield and Cormac were the two that got the Nobel Prize. Hounsfield was an extraordinary man who I met several times before he died, and I gave one of the eulogies at his funeral. No, it was a memorial service. And he was a boffin that worked for EMI medical, and story may not be true, but EMI was flush with money thanks to the Beatles. And they allowed people to work on ridiculously far-flung concepts. And Hounsfield had a single source and a single slice of a pig's brain and took samples around. And then he constructed the machine for EMI, and he worked very closely with a neuroradiologist at Atkinson Morley's, whose name has escaped me momentarily. Sorry, I'm having a senior moment. But anyway, and they worked away at it and cracked it and developed it. And EMI were the people that sold the first CT scanners. It was madness for EMI to do it. They should have gone into bed with Philips, Siemens, I think you may be thinking more on the American side on MR rather than CT, that the MR was developed more. It's a fascinating story that ultrasound, CT and MR were all developed in England, and the MR went to England and America, but CT was England and Cormac back in South Africa before he went to America.
That South African connection is always very strange, because two of the people I interviewed were very poor South African, East European Jewish emigres to South Africa. And both of them came to Cambridge. One was Aaron, the other was Sydney Bernard,
Yes.
or Sydney Brenner. Rather strange coincidence.
Well, the education at Cape Town University in those days was absolutely fantastic, and the Jewish parents were very keen to see that. There was a lot of pressure for children to succeed. I mean, again, you could also say that Max Perutz coming from Vienna was very much Cambridge's benefit too, but similar. Slightly less. I mean, Max didn't have the financial backing that. Both Aaron and I think Sydney came from relatively wealthy backgrounds.
No, Sydney.
Sydney, no.
No, he tells a lovely story of how, living in an impoverished family, he didn't go to school, but one day a visiting teacher came in and saw him trying to read the newspapers which covered their floor, and gave him the means to go to school.
Sorry, I didn't know that aspect, but I think Aaron came from a relatively satisfactory, not rich, but good background in Cape Town.
So Aaron takes us on to another subject, which is Peterhouse.
Yes.
So how did your connection with Peterhouse begin, and tell me something about that college?
Oh, right. Well, that again was luck. When I came to Cambridge in 79, yeah, no, 81, correction. Back to Cambridge in 81. I had to set up the CT, set up the department and get that going. And great fun it was, fundraising with Town and Gown, more Town than Gown. And I didn't have much time over, young family, very busy job, but I was persuaded to do some supervising in anatomy because CT is such a marvellous vehicle for demonstrating anatomy that Trinity took me on as a lector, which I suppose is a by-fellow equivalent thereof, and that was perfect. I used to teach on Monday afternoons. I took off from the hospital at about 4 o'clock. I'd do a 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, can't remember what time dinner is in
Very late.
Late, yes. I think it's 8 o'clock. So I used to do 4, 5 and 6, or 5, 6 and 7 o'clock supervisions, 8 o'clock dinner, and then one after dinner. So I did 4 hours a week of anatomy supervision. And they were very bright students, and it was great fun. And I enjoyed it, and I don't think Trinity were ever going to take me on as a fellow, but I thought that might be. But at that stage, I was still too busy to do anything. But because I'd obviously cut the mustard, as it were, in supervisions in Trinity, Peterhouse were then looking for a director of studies in medicine. And somehow my name came up. Somehow I know, because I worked closely with Professor John Davies, who's just celebrated his 101st birthday, and I saw him a week or two ago, great friend. He was the professor of pediatrics and a fellow of Peterhouse, and he took me, and I had trial by Sherry with Lord Dacre and various others, and I was miraculously elected a fellow in 86, and I had the most marvellous rooms to supervise in. If you can imagine looking at the front of Peterhouse, there's the Porter's Lodge, Pern Library, and up at the top there's a marvellous window looking down to King's Chapel in one way, across to the Master's Lodge, and across to the Fitzwilliam Museum on the other. That's where I did my anatomy supervisions. And of course, to be a full fellow, you had to do 6 hours supervisions a week. So I kept on being lector of Trinity. So I did 4 hours of supervisions in Trinity. Well, they came to me in Peterhouse, and I did 2 hours supervising, as well as the director of studieship, which is quite tough on top of a busy clinical job, but it was fantastic, and I thoroughly enjoyed all of that. Of course, when I got the chair in 94. In those days, you were not allowed to be Director of Studies and a professor because you were taking away the perks which would otherwise go to other fellows. So I had to relinquish that, which was rather sad because I enjoyed the Director of Studies aspect. But I still went on supervising throughout pro bono from now on. I went on with Trinity for about another couple of years and then stopped that, and then went on supervising Peterhouse students until I became master. I went on teaching, but not supervising. I used to do small groups of 10 or 12 medics at a time in the Master's Lodge. I didn't think it was right to be master and supervisor because if in the examinations failures committee, when the master chaired, and they'd have said they'd have had a sporting chance if it had been anyone other than the master supervising, I might have been on a weak wicket.
Right. Well, just one or two Peterhouse people. One was when I read history at Oxford, one of my closest friends was the then Hugh Trevor-Roper.
Yes.
Lord Dacre later that you mentioned. Did you? How did you get on with?
Well, I only had 1 year with him really, because he was getting to the end of his mastership, and of course he was Lord Dacre by then. I got on terribly well. My only faux pas was that I told the story to his wife about the not supporting the Lord Hague Fund.
Earl Hague's daughter. Yeah.
Without having realised the connection. She didn't totally approve of that. But no, I'm being frivolous. Curiously, I came across her later in life because when I became master, she had filled what was the brew house. I don't know whether you know, just behind the Master's Lodge was a wonderful 1400s building, which was derelict, and she used it as a potting shed, and I took great pleasure in clearing that out and converting it. It's now one of the jewels in Peterhouse's crown, the new brew house, which is a music centre. But anyway, going back to Lord Dacre, he had lost a bit of credibility in the fellowship, to be thoroughly honest, because I don't think when he was elected anybody quite knew his political colours, point one, and point two, he had the scandal of the Hitler's diaries, which didn't go so his power was diminishing, but he was a very good master. He didn't interfere too much with the college, and he let the fellowship continue and entertained fellows to the lodge. But anyway, no.
I mean, the gossip, one bit of gossip was that, as you say, the fellowship didn't really understand his politics, and they thought they were getting quite a right-wing kind of
and there was a cabal of historians, of course, in
yes,
Peterhouse.
I was going to say the very right-wing cabal of historians at Peterhouse.
Can I interrupt the word cabal? Because one of them, of course, was Maurice Cowling.
Yes, that was the one.
Who I got on with very well because he approved my Irish antecedents, but also he viewed medicine as a sort of interface between science and arts. And I well remember that I used to again do some teaching before dinner and teaching after dinner, as he did. And on one occasion, I was dining as a relatively young fellow, and all the other people dining were historians. He said, "My God, Adrian, what have you come to? A group of historians. What is the collective word for a group of historians?" "I think it's a malice of historians." That's what he said. But no, he was a colourful character, and his heart was in the right place, but he had favourites, and he was very pro-male students, and I don't think he approved of Peterhouse going mixed.
In fact, that reminds me, you probably didn't know, but a very close friend of mine and a student became the first female research fellow of Peterhouse.
Caroline Moore?
No, Maya Petrovich.
Oh, yes, I don't know her well, but yeah.
Yeah, which was, I thought, a feather in Peterhouse's cap.
Excellent.
The other person who was a historian, well, sort of, but not right-wing at all, middle of the road, but a very close friend of mine, was Tony Wrigley.
Yes.
Who was bursar.
Oh, he was really talented. He went on to become Master of Corpus, and he was terrific.
Yeah.
I mean, not only a good bursar, but a very sensible, middle-of-the-road person. And no, I was very fond of Tony Wrigley.
Yeah.
And we used to see quite a bit of him when he retired, because when you give up a mastership, on the whole, it's a bit tricky. Well, I avoided going back too much when Bridget was there. Bridget Kendall, a great friend. But you don't want to tread on the toes of your successor. So, for example, Geoffrey Lloyd used to come in here when he finished Sydney, etc., etc. But anyway.
Did they give you a room to stay?
No room, nothing. So I've you're allowed to use the parlour and the small parlour, and that's very comfortable to talk to people. But
one thing up for kings, I have this room for that.
Well, I don't think that happens anymore when you become emeritus.
Yes.
An emeritus fellow in King's still gets a room.
Not an emeritus, a life fellow.
Life fellow, but I thought that had stopped now.
No.
You can still become a life fellow.
Oh yes, 25 years.
Oh, 25 years. I think it's 15 years to become an emeritus with us, but you don't get any room or anything.
No, life fellows. Let's just move on at the end to your own research and work that if you were on a proverbial desert island and you had to choose the 2 or 3 research aspects of your life that you would like to be remembered for, what would you choose?
Well, it all goes back to what we were talking about earlier, the importance of CT, because when we were raising money and because CT became controversial, we had to counter the criticism. And if you go back to newspapers of the day, medical correspondents in various newspapers used to say, it is radiologists like Dr. Dixon and his ivory tower in Cambridge that need the latest gadgets to play with. And you had to counter that with hard evidence to show that actually it is kinder for the patients, it is better for the clinician, and the outcomes are better if you use high tech, and you can save thousands of other tests by going straight for the expensive ones. So hence go back, randomized studies to show that patients do better, do quicker. So just a very simple one, abdominal pain. If a patient pitches up to the hospital with abdominal pain, occasionally it's appendicitis, occasionally it isn't appendicitis, might be something else. And in the past, the clinician would lay their hands on, and if it hurt in the bottom right-hand corner, that was appendicitis, and they'd go in, operate. And sometimes they'd take out a normal appendix, sometimes they'd take out something else. Might be a bit of a shock to find it's a gynae thing, and a general surgeon had gone in to find it. So to be able to go in with certainty and know that it's appendicitis and know that it can be done by keyhole rather than opening up from here to Beersheba is a huge advantage. And even more important is there's nothing wrong. It's normal with confidence. Patient can go home. So saving beds, and in fact one of the papers, since you asked which, was in the early days we had to justify the expense with the Department of Health. And Addenbrooke's would only take CT in if we had good audit studies to show that we were doing more harm than more good than harm. Good slip of the tongue there. And they sent health economists to go through our books. And they, not me, showed that for every pound you spent on CT, you saved £2 elsewhere in the system, 0.1. And then, well, how are we going to save this money? Will we close some wards? What will we do? And 2 of my clinical colleagues, who I hold in great stead, Dr. Wheeler and Dr. Rubenstein, both said that they'd give up a bed in order to fund this. Well, they didn't, in fact, but that was the power of feeling amongst the medical community that this was a good thing. And then, of course, CT went too far, and everybody was having CT, and particularly MR, and politics. You don't want to get into politics, but it became pretty. So anyway, that study was good, health trends, to show that the money was well spent. The randomized trial on abdominal pain, patients didn't die. Negative appendectomy rate goes down, so no open and close. So those are two studies, I guess, but there's a whole pile of things. Extended then into magnetic resonance imaging of the spine, the knee. I did my MD in CT of the lumbar spine, again, to replace what used to be called myelography, where you were injected something horrible stuff into the spinal canal, which had huge implications in later life. Myelography, terrible headache for 2 days, quite dangerous. To be able to do that just by going through a machine with no chemicals whatsoever, I mean, it was miraculous. So all those studies showing quicker, in the long term cheaper, kinder, more accurate, etc., etc. So all those were what I spent my time researching in. And now the government are pouring money into CTs, and people are having totally ridiculous whole body MRs for reassurance, and often finding things that you would prefer not to know about. I won't quote last Sunday's newspaper, but if you know the one I'm talking about, I'm mentioning no names. But I mean, it is a major problem. Mm-hmm. Identifying, again, well, okay, since you asked me the paper, BMJ, I threw a challenge for somebody, and when £10 was worth a few bob, I said, if anybody can find me a normal CT of the abdomen, I'll pay them £10. There is no such thing. I can find an abnormality in every single person. You know, a cyst here, a cyst there, a gallstone here that they don't know about, something wrong with it. You know, we've all got things going wrong, you know, like we have moles on the skin. So there is no such thing as normal, and the real skill of the radiologist is being able to work out on the balance of probability which are the ones worth going for. I can find, I mean, I won't get into too much into private practice, but in the private sector, in America, there is a huge incentive for a radiologist to find an abnormality. Because you can say, well, the NHS report, my report might be heart size normal, lungs clear, there is a small nodule in the right upper lobe, which is probably a long-standing granuloma of no significance, full stop. Not in America or in the private, there is a small nodule in the right upper lobe, probably an old granuloma, but I would suggest that we should do a CT with contrast medium and etc., etc. And of course it's money into the pocket of the person. And then follow up in 3 months, because it might have got bigger, more money into the system. And that's what's crippling America. And it was interesting to hear, since we're bang on target today, Carney, the new Canadian Prime Minister, said, we do not do health for money in this country. Words to that effect, unlike America. Anyway.
That's very good. But it reminded me of two further things I wanted to just
ask.
Sorry? Just two further final things.
Please.
One is, we met, in fact, recently and are now talking because of Charlie Loke's 90th birthday.
Yes.
We didn't talk about Charlie, so...
Well, Charlie was a terrific friend because he was a tennis partner of mine. And he, I think if you read his book, he says that my father was one of the profound influences right at the beginning. He says something about Dad anyway.
Yeah.
And Charlie got to Cambridge at exactly the right time as a young lecturer. And it was at the time, well, I did part 2, comparative pathology, and I think he supervised me at that stage. And we were playing tennis, so tennis partner being supervised by tennis partner was quite fun. But he was, in those days, a very flamboyant young man with super cars and this, that, and the other. And anyway, it just so happened that he was coming to Cambridge at the time when Dad had got his personal chair and therefore was looking for a new director of studies. And it just fell into place perfectly for Charlie. And what a bonus for King's. And a wonderful man, and all was good. So it was lovely to be at his 90th birthday, and he's done fantastic work. Again, I think he and I have compared notes that both of us were late developers. He wasn't that academically active until later in life after his MD. And his career, then academic career, took off, and he became a great expert on the placenta. He was able to set up the centre in Cambridge, and he was very clever getting Ashley Moffat into that, because she's a very bright spark. Intriguingly, Ashley Moffat and I were both on the staff in Nottingham together, so I've known her, and I'm godfather to her daughter. So there's another wheel within a wheel there.
How nice. Is there anything else you would have liked me to ask you? Some people suddenly remember their family and the part they played in their lives, or some other subject that I should have asked you about or you'd like to comment on.
Well, my wife Anne is just fantastic, and she has been the person that also has pushed me. We met, I was senior registrar in Great Ormond Street on the Barts radiology attachment, when another break, happy break, all these things are luck, right place at the right time. One of the consultants at Great Ormond Street was going on maternity leave, so I was invited to act up as a consultant. So I was at Great Ormond Street for a year. My wife Anne was an absolutely stellar radiographer, and was heavily involved in radioisotope injections into little children having nuclear medicine studies. And it's quite complicated doing that. You've got to wear lead gloves and lead syringes and all sorts of things, and pediatric veins aren't the easiest in the first place, but my eyesight was quite good in those days. I could do lymphangiograms and things like that on little children. And anyway, over the course of a year, I realised that she was a pretty effective lady, and I invited her out, and I think it was probably my ability to get into little kids' veins that sealed the deal, and we got married in Barts the Great just before we came to Cambridge, and she allowed me to do ridiculous hours in the hospital and help me fundraise, etc., and I think if you ask anybody, she was an absolute rock solid master's wife in the lodge, and she's been with me there. 3 wonderful children. Charlie Bristol became a chartered accountant, has done very well in one of the big 4. Emily did maths at Oxford, very bright, and she has surprised us in her latter life. She came and did a MPhil with 2 young children here, and has then got a CRC, Cancer Research UK, PhD studentship, mature, and at the princely age of 40, I can't quite work it out, 42, she's just got her PhD in the Senate House last weekend.
Lovely. And
Tom is in advertising in London, but wonderful children, wonderful family, all love Ireland, and Anne has been the rock solid supporter.
Well, that's a lovely way to end. So thank you very much indeed, Adrian.